It is the 20th of July, and this day in Baptist history we are reading Living in the Valley of Death. Our passage of Scripture is Matthew chapter 10 and verse 28. And fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Worldlings of society view missionaries as a strange breed. After laboriously studying to obtain academic achievements that would enable them to live in luxury, these servants of Christ seemingly forsake such gracious amenities to live in subpar settings. However, as the missionary martyr Jim Elliot penned in his diary, and I quote, "He is no fool who gives that which he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose." End of quote. Bible-believing missionaries the world over are the real heroes. To be sure, they do not perform in arenas to the thunderous roars of approving sports, but they hear the voice of their captain saying, "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." A century ago, some of God's choice servants were laboring with the gospel in the mysterious land of China. The first political attempt to modernize China was made by the young emperor in 1897-98. He issued edict after edict declaring the ancient orders of China abolished. He outlined a new system of education and established a university at Peking for the study of Western sciences. He attempted radical reforms in administration, but the reforms were far too fast to win support, and though his efforts were sincere, they were destined for failure. There was a coup d'etat, and the young emperor was deposed, and the older order was restored. The fanatic reactionaries vented their rage against all Westerners in the famous Boxer Uprising of 1900, and I quote, "The Boxer movement was led by devotees of heterodox sects who practice occult rites which included boxing-like gestures." End of quote. It was actually an anti-foreign that Satan turned against the Lord's emissaries. The violence was most severe in the provinces of Shantung and Shanxi, where the missionaries of the British Baptist Missionary Society were most active. Though missionaries of the American Baptist Missionary Union and the Southern Baptist Foreign Mission Board recounted a number of close calls, those societies lost no personnel. However, the British Baptist Missionary Society suffered the martyrdom of 13 valiant heroes of the faith. The roll call of honor follows Mr. and Mrs. George Farthing and their 3 children, Ruth, age 10, Guy, age 8, and Elizabeth, age 3, Mr. and Mrs. Sylvester Whitehouse, Miss Ellen Mary Stewart, Mr. and Mrs. Herbert Dixon, Mr. and Mrs. William McCurrick, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Underwood, Miss Bessie Campbell, and Mr. Sidney W. Ennals. The first of the group to suffer martyrdom was the Reverend George Farthing, who was beheaded by a single blow of the executioner's sword on July 9, 1900. His death was followed quickly by that of his wife and 3 children. The report of the execution of these servants of the Lord was soon dispatched to messengers Dixon, McCurrick, Ennals, and Underwood. On hearing the terrible news, the missionaries fled for their lives. In time, they reached a place where National Christians provided refuge. After 2 weeks, their location was discovered and they fled again, this time to the adjacent hillsides. They hid for a short time in a cave, but on July 25, 1900, a military detachment arrived and they were surrounded and ultimately had to surrender. The group of missionaries was taken to Hiskou and imprisoned for 2 weeks. The Chinese in those days referred to their prisons as the Tiger's Mouth, and that appellation doubtless spoke of the cruelty of the jailers amid the filth and wretchedness of the dens in which they were forced to live during the intolerable heat of the summer. On August 9th, a deputy and 10 soldiers arrived with orders to take the missionaries to the coast, and the captives must have experienced some hope. But the carts were stopped at the gate of the city by Boxers, who took the intrepid saints of God and beheaded them one by one. All of these events would have been lost to posterity, apart from the fact that diaries left by the Reverend Herbert Dixon and some of his companions were recovered. The diaries provided deeply interesting material of those dreadful days. Mr. Dixon's diary is filled with heart-thrilling entries, but I submit only the following, and I quote, Wednesday, July 11 p.m. News received of rioting in Henskow. Official threatened for letting us escape. Our homes probably all looted. We ourselves pack up a little bedding and the few stores we have and go into hiding in our cave in the mountains. Thursday, July 12. Had a most trying climb last night, but all got safely to the cave, a mere hole in the back, room enough for all to lie down, water a mile below us, but we have 2 buckets full. Friday, July 13. Had a quiet night, all sleeping out of doors, but have to keep strictly in the cave during the day, and no talking aloud. Friday, July 20. A quiet day. Mrs. Dixon very ill, recovered, remainder of bedding left in first cave. End of quote. The Reverend Sidney Endles also kept a diary during those dire days. His entry of July 18 reveals the hopelessness of their situation, and I quote, The Lord alone can save us. If he wants us to glorify him by death, think of us as wearing the martyr's crown in the Master's presence. We shall see Jesus and walk with him. To God be the glory.